We live in a time where masculinity is shamed and men don't know what it means to be a man. As a pastor and counselor, I've spent the better part of my life equipping and training others. My goal with this show is to translate my hard-earned experience into tools and tactics to help you become stronger as a man. This is the BraveCo podcast. I'm your host, Jason Valentine. Welcome back, BraveCo Men, to the BraveCo podcast. This week, we are in the very middle of our Makings of a Man series. And if you guys have been following along, these have been awesome. I'm really enjoying it. I have another incredible man to help talk about our attribute this week, and his name is Julian Adams. Julian is an incredible man. He's an author. He's a pastor. He's a pastor of a church in Boston. He leads a whole bunch of really cool ministries, and he's also recognized as a prophet internationally, and just a guy that I want my life to look like. And so I love bringing guys on like Julian because he's living life the way that God designed men to live. And so, Julian, thanks so much, man, for coming on here and being a part of our podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to discussing what we're going to be going through today. It's an exciting opportunity to shape what it looks like for men to be who God's called them to be. I love it.
Come on, man. Thank you. Today, we're going to talk about nobility. And before we get all the way into what is nobility, I'm going to read a story about nobility. So, Sir Nicholas Winton, born in 1909 in London, exemplifies nobility through his selfless actions on the eve of World War II. Initially working as a stockbroker, Winton's life changed dramatically in December of 1938 when he visited Prague and witnessed the plight of Jewish refugees fleeing the Nazi regime. Moved by their desperate situation, Winton decided to act. Setting up an office in his hotel room, Winton organized what became known as Operation Kindertransport. He lobbied the British government, raised funds, and arranged transport and foster homes for the children. From March to August 1939, Winton and his small team managed to rescue 669 children, mostly Jewish, from his almost certain death in the Holocaust. Remarkably, Winton kept his heroic efforts a secret for nearly 50 years. His wife discovered his scrapbook in 1988, which led to his story being shared publicly. This revelation brought widespread recognition, including a knighthood from Queen Elizabeth II in 2003, and the Order of the White Lion from the Czech Republic in 2014. Despite the accolades, Winton remained humble, often downplaying his role and emphasizing that more could have been done. His actions and humility continue to inspire, showcase the true nobility lies in recognizing our shared humanity and acting with compassion and courage to help others in need. I love this story of a man who is a businessman. He's living his life. He's working hard, and all of a sudden he sees atrocity, and of course, all these young kids who are going to die. Right? They're going to be taken captive and die. And from a place of compassion, from a place of nobility, he actually goes, I'm going to do whatever it takes in order to make your life better, in order to grow your life, in order to protect you and provide for you. And, I really love this topic of nobility, because in our day today, it's easy as a man to think that success is what's most important. And achieving success. I was actually on a counseling appointment today, And I'm counseling this young man that I really like a lot. He's a really, really great man. And we started to talk through about some options in his life, about how he can grow and better his life. And he's wanting to move forward in his life and really feel like he's proud of himself and feel like he's making some good ground in life. And so I started to talk through some decisions, like, hey, let's actually look where you want to be in a year, and let's look at what you want your life to look like. Because 5 years for a young guy can be hard to pick out. It can be hard for me to pick out where I want to be in 5 years. I want to be alive in 5 years. And so he started to think through where he wanted to be. But one of the main things that he started talking about is, I feel behind. I feel like I'm missing out on life. I feel like others are ahead of me. And I feel like I'm not successful. I started to explain to him, like, I think your definition of success and what success really is are two different things. Because if you get $1 million in the bank and you get married to a woman who doesn't have good values and your relationship isn't healthy, if you're not actually a noble man, if you don't have healthy, godly character living inside of you, then is achievements really success? It's not. What comes first is, do I have the character inside of me? Am I living as a noble, godly man? And if I'm not, then everything else in our life is secondary to that. And as men, it's easy to forget that nobility comes before money. It should come before getting married. It should have come before having kids. Like, I want to be a godly, noble man. That's first what I'm going after. That's what I'm trying to achieve. Julian, in your opinion, how would you define nobility?
I think nobility is a heart posture that chooses bravery in making decisions consistent with the character of God that is at work in us, making consistent decisions in the face of impossibilities that look counterculture, that look really difficult. I grew up in South Africa during apartheid, which meant that people of color like me were separated from white people. It was legislated. It was a proper system that divided black and white in a way that was just evil.
Yeah.
And I saw nobility modeled in front of me. I saw nobility modeled in my dad's life, a godly man making brave decisions to stand up for truth and justice, making brave decisions to work according to the character of Jesus that was in him, even in a context that looked contrary and required conformity. He made those brave decisions in the way that he treated my mom, in the way that he treated us, and then seeing it at a national scale. People like Nelson Mandela, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who chose bravery and chose a posture of consistent character that worked in the face of impossibility, to be truthful, to be integrous, to redefine people's thinking around racial issues. So for me, it's quite a live topic. And these were the real men that were making the difference.
Yeah.
In a system where the government legislated the separation of men and women, particularly men of color, from their families. So it left a whole generation of people fatherless.
Wow.
These men were choosing to stand up against it, choosing to be the best model they can be for their family, choosing to be the best model they can be for the nation at the time. For me, nobility is the kind of raw bravery that says, I know who God has made me to be. I'm going to walk that way in the face of all of the junk, in the face of the culture wars, in the face of everything that's thrown at me, for the sake of legacy, for the sake of shifting it for a whole generation, which is what I now get to walk in because of people like my dad, because of people in my family, because of people in our nation who made a difference.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think to really help people understand, like, nobility is, it's being a man of character. It's being a man of integrity. It's being honest, right? When it costs you something, it's showing up when you say you're going to show up. It's following through, right? It's how you do the little things, like when no one's watching you, right? That's the most important. How do you do your everyday life? So when we think about, man, a noble man, we think through like Julian was saying, Nelson Mandela, or these men that were selfless. They lived their life based upon a creed, based upon a code that that actually followed through on what they said that they were going to do. And it's almost sorry, my throat is weird today. It's almost a dying breed in a lot of ways, because the opposite of nobility is selfishness, right? Yeah. The opposite of nobility is self-centeredness. It's what can I get out of life? What's in it for me? And I think when we go back to scripture, of course we see Jesus's model where he comes down, and it's so amazing that he came down and he, one, took on the form of man, but two, it says that he came to serve, not to be served, which is such a crazy thing, because I know I would mess that up. I'm sure I would have. If God would have put me as the savior of the world, I would have come to serve, but also to be served. It's true. Like, I would have screwed that up and worried about me and what I was going to get out of it. But he was just so perfect in the way that he came down and decided to live out a bold life of character where he followed through. He did what he said he was going to do. He showed up day after day, regardless of how he felt. He kept his word, but he was the ultimate servant. And as a man, like, I think that's the most important thing that we can do. I remember, like you, Julian, I grew up with a dad who I would say was noble. He was a noble, godly man. And I didn't actually first see it in the church world. I first saw it in my home life, and then how he led a business. And my dad was an entrepreneur. He's a businessman, and, he's a mechanic. And it was how I saw my dad treat his employees, how I saw my dad wake up every single day and take care of us. How I saw my dad hope in the face of like incredible amounts of pressure. And, my parents didn't have any money, literally didn't have any money, lots of days. Both of our cars got repossessed in one day, which is a funny story now, but it was a really painful story for a long time. And my parents worked extra to put us in a Christian school, in a tiny little Christian school. And it was a lot of money for them. It was more money than they had. But again, my parents going like, how can we set up our kids? What can I do to sacrifice my life today to make my kids better?
Yep.
Like, I had godly, noble parents. They weren't just godly, they were noble. They didn't just believe in God. Their belief system cost them something. And it's an incredible gift that they gave us. Julian, like, how do you feel like we build that? Like, there's a lot of guys that are listening to this, and even in places in my life, like, where I go like, man, this area needs to grow. Like, how would you counsel someone to start growing nobility in their life?
Jay, I think one of the things that I've come to realize about nobility and walking in nobility is that the outworking of nobility is in the furnace of pressure. Like it is all easy to have ideals, and it is all easy to have particular value systems.
Yeah.
But when you're in that moment, when you're having to choose to serve your wife, serve your family, lay down your life for your friend, when you're choosing to walk in integrity in your workplace, and when you're choosing to make the decision that you know actually will work against you, but out of the place of deep conviction in the character of Jesus, you're still walking there. That's when nobility comes. And I think there's something profound about recognizing that that's a discipline that doesn't start when you're faced with the decision. It starts when you're having to make the decisions when no one's looking, when no one is around to hold you accountable. That the internal system that you built up around what it looks like to walk in the identity of Jesus, that internal system at that moment when no one's looking, no one really is holding you accountable, and you're still making a decision that is consistent with the brave choices, the impossible choices, the ones that are holding the character of Jesus in your life to account. That's when it begins. And so for me, I remember starting to pray for my wife as a young kid. I must have been about 13 or 14 when I started praying for my wife. I was like, Jesus, give me a phenomenal, beautiful woman. I can't wait. And then watching my dad serve our family and realizing, oh, hold on a moment. There's a process that I have to begin right now in serving in this family, where I'm at, in the space that I'm in. I think most Christians often delay what's in front of them for a future promise and miss out on the lesson that God wants to teach them in the present. And we are going to make sure that we're making the decisions right now. There's this beautiful moment in the Gospels that Jesus talks about the way of the kingdom. And he says the way of the kingdom is like a master of a farm. He's got this big farm, goes out, sows some seed, and in the evening, at the nighttime, the enemy comes in, sows some tares amongst the wheat. You know that story. Most of your listeners will be familiar with that story. And Jesus makes this profound statement. He says, the way we will separate the wheat from the tares is by allowing them to grow at the same time until full maturity. And the reason he does so is because tares, when they are fully grown, they stand up quite tall and they are empty-headed. They've got no reproductive seed in them. But wheat, when it is fully grown, is bowed low, full of reproductive seed. It's got a head that is bowed low. And I want to suggest that the reason God uses maturity in the kingdom, using wheat as the example, is because the posture is that of servanthood and it's that of reproductive ability. In other words, legacy. It's about leaving something. And I think right now we get to make decisions wherever we're at, whether you're a young man or whether you're in middle age, wherever phase you're in. Like, what's your posture going to be? Is it going to be tall, empty-headed? Or is it going to be bowed low in the posture of servanthood, making those decisions even when no one else is looking? And is it going to be for the sake of someone else, for the sake of another generation, for the sake of people to come? When we live like that, we live the kingdom way. We live, like the Apostle Paul says, having this idea of a servant-hearted mind, just like Jesus did, not counting equality with God as something to be grasped, but humbling himself into the form of a servant. And that's harder than we sometimes think. It's more frustrating. I often tell people the most sanctifying moment that I discovered in my life was not even when I got married. It was when I had my first kid. The self-giving nature of serving someone so vulnerable without any return in the immediacy. Because let's be honest, we all love quick, instant return and gratification. A noble man sees the long game. A noble man sees what's coming in the future and builds carefully now, even when it doesn't count seemingly, for the sake of the future. And I think that's some of the things, some of those practices, those discipline of choosing the one before us, of laying down our life, is so important. If I can just make this one other comment.
Yeah, do it.
I think in a moment in church where, I love your family, love your dad. He's had such a massive impact on me prophetically, in the most incredible ways. And I love, what God has done with him, just his whole life story. I think one of the things that he has restored to the church is this idea of identity. Like the global church suddenly has found their identity in the most beautiful way. But I think sometimes we can teach, second generation, third generation can teach identity without understanding the price that fathers paid to discover their identity.
Wow.
And when we do that, we get entitled kids, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've got to hold the idea of discover your identity and posture yourself as a servant together. Because when you get that, you get a holistic expression of nobility.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It really is. I remember my dad saying to me when I was growing up, he told me, like, I used to be really worried, like, how was I going to give you guys, the leadership lessons that have taught me how to be a leader and how to be a man of God and how to grow in faith when growing up in a family that was really good. Right. So my dad, because he was a first generation Christian and came from a hard home, you know, he's like, that shaped my character so much. And it shaped it like gave me grit, you know, gave him grit, and it made him have to rely on God. And then when you look at, you know, I grew up in a home that was full of love and care but it's interesting because if your parents really model what it looks like to live a noble life, life in and of itself has so many challenges. I look at my life and I'm like, man, I honestly really do feel like I've lived 3 different lives. 0 to 18 felt like one life. It felt like, man, that was everything I did before I got married. And then I got married the first time, and that lasted till I was 28, and, you know, went through a divorce, and that was a completely different life. And then I went through a nervous breakdown and got remarried. And, you know, and you know what it's like. I mean, you're 40, almost 46, you're 45 years old. I'm 44. And life has so many challenges that every human being has the opportunity to allow life and allow these challenges and trials to really shape who you are. I think a lot of people have never seen godly, like real godly, healthy Christian leaders lead in a way that's inspiring.
Yeah.
And I think that what we've seen a lot and is godly leaders lead in the best way they know how, but it ends up being really controlling, or it ends up being too passive, right? It's too passive. There's not enough confrontation. There's not enough, like the Bible says, to train up a child in the way they go, and they won't, and when they get older, they won't depart from it. So we both have young kids. It feels like every week my kids are departing from what I'm teaching them.
Yeah.
But our job is to train them up, right? Is to continue to train them. And I've just seen that a lot. So I really do, like, the men in my life who have really taught me nobility, have done a great job at going, this is what it looks like to be a godly man, and walking it out and living it out in a way that isn't controlling, but also isn't coddling. And that's a fine line, right? That's a hard line. But what happens for a man is it becomes inspiring instead of, oh, this is going to control me, this is going to make me smaller. Like, everything my dad did made my life better. It made me bigger. It didn't, my dad never one time, his favor never one time diminished me. He was never too busy for me. You know, it's all those things. And so I think for guys who've, because I think you're right. Like, my dad did a lot, and there's a lot of men that have done a lot to restore the identity in the church. But I think part of what is getting restored and needs to be restored with the identity is what godly character looks like in leading young men, and in leading a family, and being a husband, and showing up. Because I think for so long we have celebrated we've celebrated the the following the rules of doing the right thing, but not doing the right thing with the right motive and in the right heart, if that makes sense. And
Absolutely.
so it's pushed a lot of young people away, and it's also pulled a lot of young people in and raised them up with, again, like too much legalism or fear. And so anyways, I don't know if you want to add to that, but I think that that's a big piece.
Yeah. Do you know, one of the things that I learned from my dad is, at best, our motives are always mixed. And
Yeah.
I mean, and I think one of the things that I love about what God's doing even in our little community, and having seen my dad live our church pastor doing the stuff, much like your dad, is the authenticity that I saw of holding two things that seem opposed in the place of tension in their own life, and still making a choice that matters. And I think one of the things
do you have an example of that?
Yeah, I think there were many moments when I could see my dad as a kid exhausted and tired. He's had a crazy week at church, having to deal with other people's affairs, having to deal with all that kind of stuff. You know the gig.
Yeah.
But still showing up at home to love us well, still doing the rough and tumble, still doing the, hey, how was your day? And I could see deep within him, dude, the man is just exhausted, yet he's giving me enough space to invite me into his world. And that was beautiful. And at the same time, showing me enough weakness to go, I need someone to help me. And that dynamic, that tension of, hey, and seeing my mum serve him in that moment, and vice versa in their weak moments, was just a beautiful dance of love, right? And it was a dance of maturity, and mature love, really, which I found incredible. And I think we need some authentic leaders who are able to live in the tension of, hey, at best, I want the accolades, and at best, I want to give it all to Jesus. And it's really difficult to hold that tension. But hey, come with me, because I'm going to consistently make a choice as far as I can in community to tell others that this is about Jesus rather than about me. You get what I'm saying? That idea of authenticity in the context of community, going on a journey together and showing up for each other in the context of a healthy expression of authenticity. I get it wrong, I get it right. Sometimes I want to get wrong and right at the same time. And then the other thing I would say is, one of the most unsexy fruits of the Holy Spirit is faithfulness.
Yeah. Yes, you're right.
Like, faithfulness is fruitfulness, right? And we, like, the idea of the glorious mundane is something that increasingly in our generation, we're missing a little bit. That actually the waking up at 5:30 to be able to serve my family well, the ability to show up in the mundane and just be faithful. Because we forget that actually, according to scripture, God rewards faithfulness, not success.
Wow. Yes, that's so good.
And we have got to learn how to lean into that. And sometimes faithfulness is boring. Sometimes faithfulness is just plain old mind numbing. But you know what? Showing up in that moment causes the reward and delight of heaven. And actually, at the end of the day, releases a dynamic of deep satisfaction that short-term adventure will never do. And we have got to reframe this for a generation and build a language that engages in the nobility of the mundane. Because ultimately, that's what sets us up for godly success and health.
Man, Julian, I really think that you're nailing it here. And when you said, I may get this wrong, but short-term adventure is stealing from future success, like future gratification, is so true, right? In what does it look like to be faithful? It looks like to be a farmer, right? It looks like to sow and to not know necessarily exactly what you're going to get out of it, but believing that I'm going to sow, I'm going to steward, I'm going to plant something today that's going to give me something in another season. Like I actually have to wait seasons in order to see this grow. And there's a guy named Alex Hormozy, which I don't like his value system. He's not necessarily a godly man, but he says people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. And I think this is really true. And when we're talking about being a godly man and being a noble man, we are very much robbing ourselves from who God's called us to be in this society because we don't actually understand sowing and reaping. All we understand is reaping, and we want to reap. We want, again, it's back to that counseling appointment that I had earlier today. I have this young man who wants to be successful, and all he wants to do is, I want to build a business and I want to have godly character. Okay. In order to do those things, you have to be willing. You actually have to endure tons of pain. That was my conversation with him. That's literally my conversation is, okay, your life's in a bunch of pain right now, right? Yes, my life is in tons of pain. Okay. In order to get out of pain, you have to make painful decisions. There's no way around it. It's the story of the sower and the seed, right? It's the parable of the sower and the seed. Well, it's those who sow with tears will reap with joy. Yeah. What's the story about? If you actually like unpack that, those who sow with tears will reap with joy. Well, a farmer is in a lean year, right? He's got to make a decision. He doesn't have enough seed to both eat and feed his family and sow a harvest. So he doesn't have enough. So he's got to make a decision. What's the decision? If he feeds his family all of the seed that he has, well, they'll be full and they'll be happy, but then that starts the poverty cycle. So think about a poverty cycle. It actually starts a poverty cycle because he doesn't have enough to both feed and plant and sow. And so, but if he sows the seed, then his family has to suffer, right? What are they suffering? They're suffering because he doesn't have enough. So he makes this decision. Again, those who sow with tears are going to reap with joy. He makes a decision. He's out in his field. I really want you guys to picture this. He's out in his field and he's planting seeds, and every seed he plants, he is crying because he also doesn't know for sure that the same thing's not going to happen. He just knows the only sure way out of this is to continue to sacrifice. That's the only sure way over time to know my life's going to be different. A year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, my life's going to be different. And the same is true for us, right? Like if you want a great marriage, well, you know, if you're in pain right now, the only way out of it is serving, is sowing, is starting to go, what can I sacrifice today? It's probably your time. You got to become a better learner. You got to get more tools. You have to learn, how to break your cycles. And we're talking about nobility. This is all under the context of being a noble man is I'm giving up today for tomorrow. I'm willing to forget about today's adventure. What would be fun today? What would be exciting? What would be enjoyable? And in my book, Winning the War Within, that I wrote a long time ago, I talk about us having to put on the farmer's mentality in order to break poverty cycles in our life and in order to become who God's called us to be. And the farmer mentality is simply that. It's, I'm willing to sacrifice today. I don't care about the heat stroke. I don't care about the blisters on my hands. I'm not going to get a guarantee in life. If we want a guarantee in life, the only guarantee that you can actually make in life is that if you put in the hard work, the effort, the sacrifice, that you're going to get what that produces in your life, which doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a millionaire. It doesn't mean that you're going to have a perfect family. It means that you're going to have godly character, that you're going to develop inside of you with God this character that can withstand blessing, that can attract God's favor, that can attract his help in your life. And man, Julian, I really do. I think that what you're talking about, God rewards faithfulness. And being faithful is so unsexy. It's crazy.
It's the most underrated spiritual fruit, I reckon. One of the things, if I can just say this, my family story is one of incredible legacy transformation.
Wow.
My parents grew up in relative poverty. I grew up in relative poverty. And they sowed faithfully into who we are, both in terms of how they dealt with their finances, how they dealt with their marriage, how they modeled something different for us. The thing that I love, particularly on the front of being faithful, just on something so simple like being generous with finance, is they gave themselves out of poverty.
Wow.
So that we, the kids don't have to live in any poverty. And we're talking, South African poverty. Yeah, this is not like it was, there was some real constraints, and we lived in relative poverty, and I get poverty is different everywhere. But seeing the transformation for a generation, seeing the inheritance that my kids will get to walk in because of sacrifices my parents made in faithfulness to God primarily, and then to us, to each other and then to us, was incredible. And I think that we have to swap out a Esau generation that is satisfied with a temporary meal that meets my hunger for a moment. And we need a Jacob generation who go, there's an eternal inheritance. There's a generational inheritance here. I want that. And even Jacob's sneakiness in that moment, God rewards because he sees faith, because he sees that this man is seeing something of a long-term perspective. And I think we need a generation like that who lean in. And one of the things that I'm discovering in the process of, I think what you're really talking about is cruciformity, being shaped in the way of the cross. That's what it looks like. That's what it means to pick up your cross and follow Jesus. That's what it means to enter into the same ministry of Jesus, which is a self-emptying ministry. That's the whole point of Jesus coming. He chooses not to access who he is in his divinity and pours himself out. It's not that he ever ceased being divine. His nobility, which came from his identity, never once ceased. It's just that his posture looked like this pouring out, this cruciformity, this willing to embrace a momentary death that seems a long time, but it actually brings about the most radical transformation. And I think when I think about my marriage, when I think about how I choose to love my wife, when I think about how I choose to honor her with my eyes, how I choose to honor my family in the way that I serve them, the way I choose to do ministry in an increasingly polarizing world, that actually I've got to do so with faithfulness at the core, followed by the self-emptying cruciformity that says, I will choose the way of the cross, because that's the model of Jesus. And if we can do that, I'm convinced that it's only until we enter into cruciformity that we get the privilege of resurrection life, where all of the rewards and the joy, which will happen this side of heaven and eternally. But the beautiful thing is the reward to receive this side of heaven is eternal in nature, so nothing can steal it. It's got nothing to do with a temporary win. It's got nothing to do with materialistic gain, and everything to do with this eternal perspective of the God kind of life that shifts everything for you.
So, it's, I think about this quite often, and I was actually weed whacking my yard the other day, and I was thinking about this very thing. Like, it's a lot of guys talk about how they would die for their family, right? Like, I would die for my wife, I would die for my family, and die for my kids, and die for my country, and of course, we see that happen, and it's. I mean, we literally just celebrated Memorial Day, and so watching men literally give their life for our country is something that I'm forever grateful for. But on the other side of the coin, sometimes it's so much harder to live for, right? To live for Christ is so much harder than to die one time. And here's what I mean. Like, it's one thing if you're in a mall and there's a shooter to protect your family and to get shot. That's a momentary, I'm making a quick decision. Of course, there's a bunch of nobility in that, and the ability to stand up one time and to do that. I'm not downplaying that at all. I'm just saying, like, that's one thing. It's another thing to go for the next 60 years of my life. I'm not going to live 6 years. For the next 50 years of my life, I'm going to day in and day out live. I'm going to live for God. I'm going to live for my family. I'm going to constantly pour myself out like Christ did. I'm not doing it for a week. I'm not doing it for a split decision. I'm not building a bunch of courage and then in one moment going, take me. I'm actually day in and day out going, my life's mission is to serve God and to empty myself out. That takes so much. It takes so much effort. But on the flip side of this, that's where all the life is, right? So we're talking about how hard it is. And I just want to swing to this other side. This is actually where all the fulfillment is. When we look at what real joy, right? Real satisfaction, real, achievement. Like when I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so rich. It's because I have delayed gratification. I've delayed a bunch of gratification and got this real reward, something that has eternal value, something that actually brings real satisfaction. It's when I look back at my marriage and I go, man, I've been married for 13 years. I have so much joy where I'm at today because of the hard things that we've been through. From not backing down, from not running away. Like, we just took a marriage assessment, the same one that we took when we were engaged 13 years later. And I got to look back and go, oh my goodness, babe, look at the areas that we improved. Look at our communication. Look at our conflict resolution. Look at my passivity has lessened and your partner dominance has lessened. And look at our assertiveness, how that's grown. Like, there's so much joy in our marriage because we have sown and we've laid down our lives. So I don't want to kick this too much, but I do want to say, like, this is when you start to build a life of nobility on the front end, it's a ton of sacrifice and a ton of hardship and making hard decisions. And again, some of you may have to break off relationships that are unhealthy. Some of you may have to break addictions in your life that you've been suffering under for a long time. Some of you may have to change the way that you're eating and go right some wrongs, right? You realize, oh, I promised some things that I haven't followed through with. I got to go clean up a relationship that I've kind of made a mess here. But over time, it's like a garden. Over time, you get all the weeds out. And not only is it easier to maintain, but now I'm getting the fruit of that life. I'm getting the fruit of the Spirit, the joy, the peace, the life, the wholeness, right? I'm getting those things in my life. And all of a sudden it's like, why would I want to live any other way? Nobility has its benefits. The benefits of nobility is you build this beautiful garden, this beautiful life that you want to live in, that produces life everywhere you go. You've got grandkids that love you. You have a wife that respects you. You have relationships that are deep and meaningful and purposeful, eventually it's not that you quit laying down your life. It's that you've created an ecosystem that has lots of fruit, an ecosystem that, what your dad and mom sacrificed for, although they still give and although their values haven't changed, it's easier than it was 30 years ago. They're reaping the rewards of sowing. And that's the beauty, guys, is in these principles. At first it's, I got to get over this painful hurdle and go through the season that's challenging. And not that we don't have other challenging seasons, but eventually you build this ecosystem that has momentum and it has fruit, and it's like working out. It's like the first year of working out's hard. After that, you've built a habit and an ecosystem. That's who you are. You built an identity. I'm a man who takes care of himself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And that feels good. It has a reward built into it. It's just not in the day.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think genuine masculinity looks like an all-out pursuit of Christ-likeness.
Yeah.
And I think we can define it by so many things in terms of adventure, strength, leadership, all of those things. And they're all right.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's got to look like Jesus. If we're going to be in any way fruitful, if we're going to be in any way deeply satisfied. And I think one of the constructs that we're breaking off, this generation, we got church full of young men and women. The average age is probably about 25, here in Boston. And one of the things we're breaking off is the idea of quick growth, the idea of quick, all of the stuff, instant. But also the invitation is to an empowerment by the Spirit of God, an invitation to empowerment by grace that gets you into places that you could never earn. It's not that God leaves us to our own devices. It's not that we're left to our own self-will. It's that there's this dynamic of the fusion of his kindness toward us. And I want to say this, I think one of the ultimate expressions of nobility is the ability to show kindness and the ability to receive kindness.
Wow.
And when we get the kindness of God, it empowers us to be kind to others.
Wow.
It empowers us to automatically position ourselves into a place of preferring the one in front of us, because that's really the heart of kindness. And I think there's something in a culture right now that is dominated by loudness and by the strength of your social media platform or by the strength of your ability to make enough noise. I wonder if one of the ultimate expressions of nobility is the ability to show kindness and receive kindness, so that we live from that place.
It's amazing. I think so. It's incredible. To show kindness, you have to be thinking of somebody else. You have to be thinking of what would actually bless them. And again, I'm back in the servant role. I'm back in the role of using what I have and my resources to better somebody else. And I love it. Julian, thank you so much, man, for coming on and pouring out your wisdom. I want to leave the guys with the challenge this week. We've been challenging the guys every week. And this week, I want to challenge you to serve. So I want you to find someone or some place that you can serve that's outside of your normal. And it could be, I don't know, like it could literally be going to the homeless shelter and feeding, meals. It could be helping out at your local church. It could be doing something like that. But find a way to get outside of yourself and to give from a place of love, from a place of caring, and flex that muscle of nobility, flex that muscle of delayed gratification. Lay your life down a little bit and start thinking through, like, what are the areas of my life that I can bless other people? The other thing that I think is really would be really huge is there something in my life that I need to clean up? Is there an area in my life that that I'm not living like a noble man. And I need to actually go right that wrong. I need to make it right. That I speak in a way that wasn't kind, that I not follow through in an area that I was supposed to follow through. Am I not living up to that? Just take a minute with the Holy Spirit and allow him to show you that area in your life, and then go right that wrong this week. So, Julian, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on here.
Thanks for having me on. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, it means a lot. All right, BraveCo Men, have an incredible week. Stay brave out there. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to the BraveCo podcast. If you like this podcast, would you please rate it, review it, leave us a great comment. And if you like this episode in particular, share it with your friends and family. That helps us to spread the word. Guys, stay brave. We'll see you next week.